everybody. This is Mike Greening from CSMG. Today we are going to talk, this afternoon we're going to talk to you about MVNO and some of the emerging trends in MVNO. And there were a number of topic areas that we wanted to address in the session, covering really from the MVNO market landscape and how it's evolving, through to emerging opportunities in regions where we're seeing new growth in MVNO, through to changing business models and particularly the rationale in some of the drivers for launching an MVNO, and then some of the other alternative opportunities that are coming, particularly around over the top and whether that's a threat or an opportunity, and then how MVNOs can also benefit from potential data monetization. But before we get into the detail, I just wanted to give you an introduction to CSMG. So we're a strategy and business consulting firm, part of the TMNG group. We also have a sister company called Acision, and I know they've dialed in to the call this afternoon. And we effectively are a pure telco focused consultancy, working with a wide range of clients from vendors through to regulators, operators, as well as new entrant MVNOs. And obviously that's what today's discussion is about. But just to give you a feel, some of our clients in the space, predominantly we do work with service providers, and you'll see many service MNOs there, and also some of the other clients ranging from vendors, regulators, through to the new entrants. So many brands there that you'll no doubt recognize. But then the key thing for today's call is MVNO and what we're doing in the MVNO space. So we've worked with a wide range of players, some of them mentioned here, starting from, I suppose, large scale entrants, some of the larger brands, right through to smaller startups, including both operators and MVNO entrants. So in terms of MVNO, our experience comes from supporting with the business case and strategy development, right through to negotiation, then actually set up of MVNOs themselves. And then from the MNO side, obviously, they ask the question of, should we play a reactive approach, proactive? And we've got involved with setting up some of the infrastructure to host MVNOs. So a real variety of experience. So in terms of getting into the detail, then there are a whole host of MVNOs out there today. I'm sure all of you have come across MVNOs on the call in your own markets. And general retailers such as Tesco, Carrefour have entered the space. The traditional, so low cost, no frill MVNO, which originated with Telmore in Denmark. There are many fixed players now, cable cos, in fixed only players that have launched MVNOs, and also ethnic and international, so the likes of Lebara and Leica, in those other players that are targeting niche ethnic communities, are now really taking a foothold in the space, and also other types of MVNO out there as well. And then what about the importance of MVNO? We're seeing a massive emphasis now, a growing emphasis of operators placing on their wholesale divisions. So if we take as an example, Everything Everywhere in the UK, they are really putting a great deal of focus onto their platform with both aggregators and MVNOs, and with expectations that the market will grow out to about 18% of total subscribers by 2018. And then we look to the US market, and Sprint is very active in the MVNO space and realizes the benefits of wholesale, and looking to drive a very significant proportion of its net adds through its wholesale channel. And we're seeing that familiar theme across a whole host MNOs out there, not just challenger MNOs that are looking to drive up market share in wholesale, but also the incumbent MNOs. And I think what's particularly important is the birth rate of MVNOs globally, and we continue to see, and these just are some examples of MVNOs that have rolled out over the last couple of months, and there's many more out there. And if we look at now the markets that are coming online, many more markets now are rolling out MVNO, but we're seeing a continued continued market, actually a resurgence in the number of MVNOs that are launching. In terms of the failures, so I've mentioned the birth rate is very high, but the death rate of MVNO is also very high, and there are a number of key reasons for that. And if we look at some of the reasons for failure, I mean, they really are quite varied. I mean, a lot of just through just lack of demand for the service. So the importance of having a differentiator that's sustainable. There's many MVNOs there that do roll out, but they're unable to continually compete against other MVNOs out there or the MNO competition. So something that's sustainable is pretty fundamental. Regulatory reasons are also a key driver of failure. So the big example out there is Virgin Mobile in Qatar that launched with QTEL, and there was pushback from the regulator, and actually Virgin had to pull back from that market. And so having regulatory clarity is pretty fundamental for operators or MVNOs that are thinking about investing in the market. And then there are others. So if we look at Cox, the reason there was that the MVNO, and we all know that MVNO businesses run with pretty wafer, in many cases, pretty wafer thin margins. And once, in this case, the MVNO started to dilute the core, the core business in the margin, then Cox decided to pull out of that business. And that's one reason why we've seen many MVNOs not get off the ground, is because the actual revenue and the margin specifically is out of kilter with the core business. So some players decide not to go ahead. But in terms of trends, there are many trends impacting the MVNO space. We've just captured some of them here, and what I'd like to do is just take you through some of those. And what you'll see is there's certainly a theme on emerging markets, and that will come out in certainly the beginning part of this presentation. I think if we look at where some of the MVNO conferences and interest now, we look at sort of Africa, some countries in Africa, Asia, LATAM, they're all markets that are going through a very early, shall we say, growth phase within the MVNO space. But what's interesting is initially just to look at the establishment of MVNOs globally, just to get a feel for what share of the market have they actually taken. It's really very varied by country and by region. So even within Europe itself, the MVNO share, so the number of subscribers versus the total number of subscribers that MVNOs have taken, it actually varies quite significantly. So in countries like the Czech Republic is now pretty much at zero, and they're starting to look at MVNOs, and potential players are coming to the market. The same with Hungary. But then Finland is very low at just under 3%, up to the UK at 13%, Germany now approaching 20%. And so it's very varied based on the strategies that specific operators have taken. But I think what's particularly interesting is the fact that market shares have actually come down in some countries. So where MVNOs have actually been acquired, so some successful MVNOs, so if we take Denmark, for example, Australia, then some MVNOs have been acquired by their host operators when either they become very significant to their core business, or the operator wants to have more control, or the MVNO wants an exit route. Then the operator often may take an acquisition route. So also you can see here in terms of emerging markets, obviously South America is in very sort of virgin territory. So is Africa, but we're seeing, we are starting to see growth now in the Middle East, and Oman is the leading example there, and it's up to roughly around 9% market share of total subscribers. And then we go to look at Africa specifically, and we're now starting to see. So we have just been working on an MVNO project in Southern Africa, and just with the business case in the strategy phase. But we are starting to see a lot more activity in this region, both from markets that have launched sub-brands and branded reseller models. So Senegal and the Ivory Coast. So we have Tubatel, and we have Kirin, which is actually a water brand. Trace, which launched in the Ivory Coast, but they launched a branded reseller model, but have actually now pulled back due to the relationship that they had with MTN. Set Mobile, which is up to 200,000 subscribers in Cameroon, and then the most activity, as we see, has been in South Africa. So Virgin have acquired just under 400,000 subscribers. Some would view that as a success. I think many people would view that as still a long way to go to reach their full potential. But we're seeing most of the activity coming out of South Africa at the moment as companies explore niche segments of the market, and also launch with differentiated content. I think the other point worth noting in North Africa, countries like Egypt are currently going through, Ghana are both going through a legislation process at the moment to actually, Antigua, all going through a regulatory process to allow MVNO. And in Egypt specifically, the view is that Telecom Egypt will be given the license there. And then we move on to the Asian markets. Again, it's a similar story. There are not that many MVNOs that have launched to date, but there are certainly some good reference examples that are there. And what we're also seeing now is we're starting to see interest from the operators that are looking to build platforms. So the ability to really scale up the MVNO that are hosted, and the number of MVNOs that are hosted by operators is quite limited. So I think a lot of the operators in the region really have to look at what platforms they need to deploy in order to successfully host and manage MVNOs on their network. So we then move on and we look at the potential of some of these emerging markets. And what is often quite helpful to look at is the number of players within the market. So what we have done on this slide is specifically looked at the African region, and on the x-axis we have the number of players. So effectively the market share of players that have launched. So we have those that are at 50% implies that there are only two operators in the market. At around 33%, it means that there are around 3 operators in the market. And then on the left-hand side, it starts to get a lot more competitive. And the x-axis just represents the y-axis, represents the number of the subs within those markets that are available. So obviously the fewer players that there are in the market, it really does open up a much stronger and significant opportunity for MVNO entrants that are looking at potentially entering a market. When we look at markets such as, for example, Nigeria, Tanzania, they've got a much higher number of entrants. They've already got 8 or so mobile players within the market today, so it's going to be very, very difficult. They're already cutthroat sectors, and it's going to be very difficult for an MVNO to really establish itself within those markets. So the challenge for launching in the, emerging markets, particularly, is around the price volatility. So one of the key drivers in managing a successful wholesale deal is having stability in wholesale pricing. And as we can see here, that prices are falling quite dramatically. So when we look at markets like Kenya, Uganda, Egypt, where we're seeing very, very significant reductions, 12%, 20% plus reductions a year in pricing, then this has a significant impact on the business case. And we worked on a project in Uganda, for example. When Bharti entered the market, they reduced pricing by 50% over the space of a few months. So for an MVNO entering the market, it really can blow the business case. So you really need to think carefully around, will the pricing and the stability of that pricing enable an MVNO to be sustainable in the long term. And that really makes us think about the business case, because we really need to see, we're seeing MVNOs, certainly the business cases that we've worked on, sometimes paybacks are not just a year 5, 6, 7, and for many businesses, that's not going to be sustainable and reach the threshold or meet the threshold for investment. So what we're actually, some of the issues that we're seeing around, particularly the high setup cost with the MNO, and again, this is really being driven out of some of the emerging markets, the high subscriber acquisition costs and what can be done to minimize that, and particularly the very high wholesale, the poor gross margins that are being achieved. So there's plenty that can be done to actually really pull back, really improve the economics and to help make the business case work and actually make the payback much more attractive for entrants. And one way to do that is actually to look at the rationale for actually launching an MVNO and why an MVNO would want to launch in the first place. Because traditionally the model is being, and we can see on the left-hand side, the model is being that the bulk of the revenue, and the grey, we'll see from the grey bar, the bulk of the revenue of an MVNO has always been around the telco business to drive mobile core revenue, which would be the driver for launching the MVNO. And now what we're seeing is, certainly in terms of the rationale for launching, is a shift towards really a future model where telco in the mobile revenues themselves play a much smaller contribution to the overall business case and the rationale of launching. And as you can see on the right-hand side, for a retailer, and we recently worked with a retailer that was looking at launching a mobile business, and it wasn't one of the players outlined here, but they had a substantial loyalty program where 4 million customers as part of their loyalty program, and for them it wasn't about driving incremental mobile revenue. It was actually about driving an uplift to the core business in terms of increasing footfall into the store, as well increasing retail spend in locking in the customer. In the uplift, driving an uplift in their core business by a couple of percentage points more than outweighed the benefit of the mobile revenue. So as you can just see, there are certainly different drivers for players now entering the MVNO space. And so that brings us on to the model that an MVNO would look for. So we're seeing, as you can see, some examples on the left-hand side: MCV, Red Bull, Fenercel, which is one of the football clubs in Turkey. There's a whole host of players there now that are they don't want to be a mobile. They're not interested in being mobile companies. They're content companies. They're differentiating on their core business, and they don't really want the pain of managing a mobile business. And there's a much higher risk associated with being a traditional MVNO. So what we're seeing now are much more interested in either JV models or brand licensing models, where the downside of doing that, obviously, is that the customer ownership may be with the operator, so the MVNO doesn't actually own the customer. But the benefit is that there's very low risk for them to enter the market. They get lots of support from a potential, the operator that they work with, and they use it to drive. They take a share of the revenue, a share of the profit, but really the key reason is to drive an uplift to that core business, the fourth bucket down within the model. And I think what's important is that fifth row is that the actual acquisition in the operating costs are much lower once you move over to that branded license in JV model. But of course, you've got to share your revenues with the partner that the MVNO works with. And then in terms of the managed service and the capabilities that an MVNO would build to roll out, we're also seeing a change in model there. So on the left-hand side, we can see from connectivity to provisioning, billing, content. These are all components that an MVNO would have to build in order to roll out an MVNO, and certainly areas that many of the MVNO would either manage themselves, or they would work with an MVNE, to build that capability to hook into the MNO. But we're now seeing a transition to the MVNA model and also a managed service model. And the MVNA model is around aggregation, in working with a party that's contracted by the operator to provide many of the setup services that are needed to launch an MVNO. And obviously, what that is doing is really lowering the cost of entry for some of these new entrants. So the number of subscribers that you need to launch is now much lower. And then looking forward beyond MVNA, what we're seeing now is a managed service model that's starting to evolve. And that is based on, again, players, maybe for example like large scale retailers that have no telco experience. What they're looking to do is really buy as a managed service from the operator or a third party all of the necessary components, perhaps on a license fee model or a per sub model, all of the components that they would need to run that MVNO. And it just doesn't stop at, for example, the technical components. It could extend into marketing functions, proposition development, and even as far as providing staff to put into their own points of presence. Okay, so the MNO could potentially even provide, the resource, the skill set that would help drive sales within the MVNO's own outlets. So there's lots of opportunity for the managed service model within the MVNO space. And then we look at some of the unfulfilled market segments. So going on from the different MVNO models to looking at where we're seeing opportunity in the market for MVNOs. And I think in most markets now, ethnic is certainly been a focus, and will continue to be a focus for many markets. But the pro there is certainly well established. There's certainly an addressable market which to target. But I think the con is that it's now very certainly highly penetrated. There's lots of competition. In the ARPUs for MVNOs are generally much lower. If we look at the business segment, this is certainly an area that's underpenetrated by MVNOs today, and there's certainly opportunities there, certainly at the SMB end of the market. But the real challenge is targeting the business segment, is to be able to really secure an MVNO deal that will enable that MVNO to compete versus the operator. And it's pricing is very competitive within the business space. So having commercials that support an MVNO to compete effectively with the operator will be could be quite challenging. So it will be it's essential to have the value adds and differentiators beyond price, certainly to compete in that space. As we look at other markets, the rural opportunity is also quite attractive, or could be quite attractive for MNOs in emerging markets. The cost to actually win a customer is much higher. The profitability on some of those rural customers is considerably lower, or even loss-making for an MNO once they're acquired. So is there an opportunity to offload that base to an MVNO in which they could target that more effectively? So, for example, if we took a post office within an emerging market, you could argue, or even in a mature market, you could argue that the point of presence in the distribution power is much more significant, and they're able to serve their customer much more effectively just due to the distribution network that they have. So there's certainly an opportunity for MVNOs. And then the last one we have here is around the high-end customer. And I think it's the dream of all new entrants to be able to focus on and offer value to high net worth customers, particularly offering them unique services that an operator wouldn't be able to or isn't able to provide today. But the downside there is that, again, that the MNO is less likely to give up that segment. So securing a deal to be able to target a very high-end segment that cannibalizes the operator could be quite difficult. But I think with any segmentation strategy, what is key for an MVNO launching in any market is to really select the operator accordingly. So to pick the operator where they're under-indexing in the segment that you're really looking to go after. Then we move on to M2M. So this is obviously a massive growth area, not just for MVNO, but generally for MNOs. There are a couple of, there are certainly opportunities here for niche players to enter the space, particularly utility. So certainly segment-based opportunities within M2M that can be exploited from new entrants targeting the market. And I think what's key here is that the role of the MVNO here may not just be to serve end customers. It's to provide it could be to provide the aggregation, an aggregation role. Certainly with the APIs and the interfaces to hook into the respective enterprise customers that are looking to offer M2M based services. And we're certainly seeing examples now of M2M players that are securing M2M deals or MVNO deals. I think we'll see more players that will secure international MVNO deals within the M2M space. Another area is looking at migrant workers in communities. So an example we've got on the left-hand side is around migrant and expat second generation Arab community. So we're seeing now, significant populations, and this just provides a snapshot of some of those markets. So in Italy, for example, Vodafone Egypt recently launched an MVNO called Bladna, targeting the Arabic community, and we're going to see more activity in that space. And on the right-hand side, we've got just a chart here that gives you an indication of the migration patterns of Asians to other parts of the globe, but not just the globe, but also within their own region. And obviously, the US is an inbound destination for many Asian markets. But we're certainly seeing activity in this space. So China, for example, launched an MVNO in the UK and is looking at expanding internationally. PLDT in the Philippines is capturing the Filipino community, and there are plenty of other examples. And we actually worked with NTT that launched an MVNO targeting the Japanese community in the US. And the interesting point with this slide is around it's not just about new entrants that are targeting the migrant workers and communities. It's also operators, and it's really the operators that are leading the force here. So just some examples on the left-hand side of operators that have launched MVNOs in a wide range of markets, predominantly all pretty much targeting the consumer segment, other than BT, which was aimed at the SME market. And I think we'll certainly see more announcements, both from these existing players that are looking to expand their footprints, as well as new players, new operators that are looking to expand their reach. Because when license opportunities aren't available, then MVNO is seen as another route to international expansion. And that international expansion is certainly a theme that we're going to continue to see throughout 2013. So here are just a few MVNOs that are on their route to expansion. Virgin is obviously one player that's regularly cited in the press. They've actually recently secured funding for more rollouts in LATAM. They're looking at Russia, which is one of the most recent they've announced, and there's also plenty of other markets they will be looking at. Leica is a Leica in Labara. Two international ethnic plays are examples of companies that are expanding. Red Bull, MTV, both again have quite ambitious expansion plans. And as I mentioned before, their real driver isn't necessarily capturing traditional MVNO customers. It's about capturing the footprint that they have. So if we take companies like Trace and MTV, both music focused companies, they have in terms of the eyeballs they have globally on their content, then it's highly significant. And if they can drive the ARPU up of content or share of mobile revenue, then there's certainly a great opportunity for them to do that. And then we move on to OTT and over the top applications. And this isn't just focused on text. This is now impacting voice in video, and we're seeing operators now really see some cannibalization in their numbers. So, KPN, Verizon, Arcep in France have all quoted specific declines and these are just examples of declines that they're actually seeing in their traffic. And there's a whole host of players now that are out there capturing this opportunity. Obviously, there's the Apple messaging service, which is popular. There's Viber, there's Tango. Mixit is in Africa, and they are a messaging and social networking community. So there are a whole host of OTT plays that are impacting operators, and we're only going to see that increase moving forward. And what's interesting actually is that the projections do vary significantly by operator and by analyst house in terms of the threat that these are going to have on the market. Now, I suppose from an operator's perspective and an MVNO's perspective, it's how do you counter that? Is it a threat? Is it an opportunity? Do you partner? Do you build your own? So we're seeing very different strategies now that are out there. And OTT can play a very, quite a significant role for potential MVNOs. So if an MVNO is looking, for example, to target a niche, ethnic or international segment, then there are a number of ways in which they could do that. They could build a traditional MVNO like a Olabara. They could build. You don't necessarily have to build an MVNO at all. Okay, so you could actually look to offer an over-the-top application. And we know now this is a route that some operators are even considering as an alternative to MVNO to capture some of their domestic customers in international markets. So to avoid the cost of build, the capex cost of rolling out an MVNO, then there are certainly alternatives. Operators are looking at alternatives to capture that opportunity. And then there are other models. So, for example, there are multi-IMSI, dual IMSI, Wi-Fi offload, all examples again in which players could capture that ethnic international segment. But I think what we're actually going to see is a combination of some of these, not necessarily on a standalone basis, but some of these models coming together to offer quite a compelling service to customers. And in terms of OTT services that have actually launched, there are a whole host out there, and this just gives you a feel for now the operators that are realizing the importance of the OTT play. Okay, because operators are seeing their revenues being cannibalized. So one way of pushing back and fighting back is to actually build their own either their own proprietary solutions or generally in partnership with others. And I think some that we're seeing, for example, Bobsled in the US, Skype, and obviously Three in some of its markets, and Telefonica with Tumi. So there's a number of players out there. And the driver for this is to capture incremental ARPU that you wouldn't have otherwise captured. Okay, and I think with most of the players moving forward, is that what they'll be looking to do is really capture some form of monthly recurring revenue from customers signing up to some of these services, or building them into their existing packages to make them more compelling versus their competitors. So what about the opportunity for MVNO? So we haven't seen a great deal of activity at the moment with respect to MVNOs rolling out OTT applications. Specifically, obviously, I'm now talking for voice and for data capture. But what we have seen are two specific players. So we've got ULOP in Spain, and we've got Republic Wireless in the US. And I think the interesting, and I'm going to mention on this call Republic Wireless, because Why that's not a traditional OTT app that someone would download to their iPhone. It comes built into the handset which a customer procures. But I think the point is it's still OTT because it's diverting traffic away from the traditional mobile network and offloading it to Wi-Fi, both in terms of data traffic and in terms of voice traffic. And why that's important for an MVNO is because what they're able to do then is offer much more competitive rates, compelling propositions that they wouldn't have been able to do based on the economics that they would have secured with their host operator. So it really does open up some quite significant opportunities for MVNOs to differentiate within their respective markets. And it's still very early days, but we're expecting to, based on some of the discussions we've had, some of the the attendees at conferences that we've met, then we are certainly going to see more traction in 2013 within this space. And certainly where traditional OTT players may complement their existing services with MVNO and vice versa. So there are different areas of development that we'll see in that space. And then finally, I wanted to just talk through data monetization. And that's certainly an area where it's still early days, operators are still working this out, but it's something that MVNOs really do need to be on top of. Certainly when it comes to negotiating their MVNO contractual terms, but also understanding what they can leverage from their operator as well as their customer base to really package up that data to add incremental value. And that can come from personal data, from the bill, from the registration of the service, through to the services that they're using, through to the location, through to the content that they're actually downloading. So there's lots that can be sourced. And why that is important, as you'll see on the right-hand side, is that there's plenty of opportunity to offer targeted services at the customer base based on this insight that an MVNO is able to collect. There are actually even MVNOs that are moving towards advertising. So there are some that have launched in the past and failed. There are others that are coming back. And I think leveraging that data from the network and leveraging it from the services that customers are using will be very important for marketers. So monetizing that data and selling it to third parties, obviously ensuring on a compliant basis. There's potential to offer targeted services for acquisition, for loyalty, but also to use it for care. So getting into drilling into the network to understand specifically, when a customer is having difficulties with a service, and enabling, a customer service rep or to remotely manage and control that service and enable that service for a customer. So there's plenty of opportunity, untapped opportunity for MVNOs to differentiate in this space, but it's going to be contingent based on the partners that they work with and also the capabilities of the MNO to enable them to do some of these types of these things. So just as a conclusion, we've certainly seen plenty, as I talked through, plenty of opportunity, both in mature and emerging markets. I think we're going to continue to see continued growth in mature markets. The number of subscribers and share of MVNO subscribers will continue to rise. From a commercial and operational model perspective, we're going to see now MVNOs launching for different reasons, and for those reasons they're going to require a different model to enable them to have sustainable business models. And then from an opportunity perspective, we're going to see more niche segments. We're going to see innovative ways in which MVNOs use and partner with OTT players. And as I said, data monetization can certainly, in a market where margin is so important, and it can be so thin, then being able to extract incremental value from the customer will be enabled through data monetization. So I think moving forward, that will become pretty fundamental for many MVNOs out there. So that's pretty much all I wanted to run through today. So thank you for your time. We have another 15 minutes or so for questions. So feel free to fire away. So in terms of the first, there's one question that's come in is around what are the options for an MVNO in terms of building out some of its capabilities. And, what types of partner does an MVNO need to be working with? So I think that's we can answer that in a number of different ways. But I think what we're seeing is now there are a whole host of vendors that are out there that can work with MVNOs. There are specialist vendors through to should we say more tier one, large, the Huawei's, the Ericssons, but they're typically used by the MNOs themselves. And I think what's important for an MVNO is to understand what it wants to procure from that specialist vendor versus what it can get from the MNO itself. And I think what often happens is that when an MVNO entrant enters into negotiations with an operator, they don't really fully, first of all, understand what they can get from that MNO itself. And I think that sometimes there needs to be a healthy balance between extraction of value from the MNO versus the components that you'll require from an MVNO, an MVNE, the enabler. And I think what we're seeing now is not, all of the enablers are now building end-to-end propositions to really MVNOs in a box. But to ensure best of breed, it's often quite essential to work with a number of partners to ensure that the MVNO is able to offer the propositions that it wants to throughout its life cycle. Okay, one question that's come in is around retail-based MVNO, and what are retailers? What is the benefit of a retailer offering mobile in its stores? I think when you can also it also offers airtime through third parties. So I think what is the benefit to retailers for becoming an MVNO? For me personally, if you were to look at the incremental benefit that most retailers would get from their MVNO businesses, it's very small. So I would say if I was a retailer looking at MVNO, or if I was an MNO in discussions with a retailer, then I would be quickly thinking about the incremental benefit that MVNO business could provide to my core grocery and retail business. Okay, and that could be through targeted push messaging or cross-sell of services specifically. So in store, it could be location-based messaging. It could be loyalty. So Tesco actually at the moment, and some of those types of player, they could do a lot more in terms of tying their mobile service to their club cards. Okay, and at the moment, most are focused on, the more you top up, the points you earn. Well, I think the reverse of that could also be true. Okay, so the more you spend in store, then the more airtime that you could receive. And I think having that linkage between potentially the loyalty program and the airtime itself could be a very interesting way for that retailer to differentiate and lock in its customer base. And this is certainly something that we've seen retailers start to explore. The challenge is obviously the back-end integration into its loyalty program and linking that to the charging and billing mechanism of the MVNE. But certainly lots of opportunity there. Any other questions? That's two questions. Any others? Okay, so another question that's come in is please detail new opportunities in the MVNO space, particularly in Africa. So Africa is certainly it's certainly in a growth. Certainly still in most markets in Africa are still growing. Penetration is extremely high. The market that we've just been working in is around 160% penetration, but there is still opportunity. And I did share one particular slide that covered some of the MVNOs that have launched today, but actually most of them are not strictly MVNOs still. So there are many. Let's call them sub-brands and brand licenses that are out there. And that's partly due to the regulatory environment within Africa. And that's the key reason, I think, why other than the ARPUs being low, that's another reason why potential entrants have held back, because there is a risk that the MNOs could potentially lobby the regulator. Okay, and that's exactly what happened in Senegal, where there were 2 launches, and the same happened in Qatar, which is not in Africa. 2 MVNO launches. They were lobbied, and basically then they had to be called sub-brands. And for a potential entrant, then that instability when you're having to invest is not going to be ideal. But in terms of opportunities, plenty of opportunities out there. The initial ones that have been targeted are around the migrant communities, post offices. So Morocco Post is looking to follow, the post offices in Italy, in Ireland, in Portugal. The benefit of post offices is that they are very strong in rural areas. In that, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, having that rural footprint will be a significant benefit. Trace is another company looking at launching in Africa, and they have mobile content, music content, and they are all over Africa, particularly West Africa, and they will be using their brand, to their TV brand, to drive sales. Okay, so some other questions that have come in. Okay, so are there legal or regulatory requirements for MNOs to open their networks to MVNOs outside the US? So if we're saying, are there regulatory requirements for MNOs to open their networks, then it completely depends on the market that you're looking at. So there's generally a spectrum of regulation for MVNO, and at one end of the spectrum there is no regulation, free negotiation. It's down to the operators to say yes or no and to reach commercial terms that is acceptable to both parties, through to issuing or extending a traditional reseller or telecoms license to an MVNO. So that's exactly what happens in South Africa today. We worked on a project in Uganda. That was exactly what happened there. It's the easy way to launch an MVNO is just through a traditional license, a resale license for fixed or mobile. Then there are MVNO licenses, which many countries are now working through. And then at the extreme, then MVNOs become mandated, and the operators are forced to offer and open up their network. So that's exactly what is happening at the moment in Saudi, where the proposal is that each operator will have to offer and open up its network to one MVNO. And the furthest extreme is where the regulator mandates pricing, but that's very rare. So that is that question. So then we're asked, is it an internal business decision? Then obviously it's not just internal if the operators are in an environment where they have to open their MVNOs. But what we're seeing in most markets is that an operator has to work out, should they be reactive or should they be proactive? And that's the strategy that MNOs have to work through. And in operators now in emerging markets are going through exactly the same questions and exactly the same challenges as what operators went through in the US, in Europe, or certain countries in Europe, 5 to 10 years ago. And the biggest question is cannibalization. And will it cannibalize my base? But the key question to ask is, even if I do lose some customers, I'm going to lose some customers anyway, but can I acquire customers more cost effectively through a wholesale means than a retail? And that's what's of key importance. So then, in terms of some other questions, in terms of the global MVNOs, apart from pure scale, are there any other advantages technically or commercially? So in terms of if we're talking global MVNO or full MVNO, so I think if I just ask the question, are there benefits of having full MVNO? Then the answer is yes, but it depends on your circumstance. So if you're looking to control the call, offer least cost routing, have greater negotiation power with the operator, then yes, full MVNO can be of benefit. There are certain components like the GGSN that you would probably many MVNOs would want to own now. They don't all need the HLR. You don't need the core switching, but you may own certain components like the GGSN, because if you want to offer zero rated content, for example, for Facebook or other apps, then that's something that you may want to consider. But for global, then if we think about it from a global perspective, then are there advantages technically or commercially? Then what we're seeing now is the global MVNOs are lifting and shifting the capability that they have in one market and applying it to others. So yes, there is an economy of scale through international expansion. Okay, so if we just go on to another question, then I'm just trying to read them here. Are there examples of MVNOs that have migrated to asset infrastructure retail providers with licenses? If so, are they concentrated in a specific international area? I'm not sure if I'm interpreting the question correctly, but in terms of MVNOs, there are MVNOs that have moved from like a light MVNO model to an asset-based infrastructure model, where they would require, where they own the infrastructure. So if we take Virgin in France, some of the other MVNOs in France actually are moving to a full MVNO model. But I think the question specifically is, are players moving to full cellular licenses? So there are examples of players. So I believe Tele2, they started as an MVNO and they became a full licensed MNO. So there are, I think, select examples of where that has happened. I'm just seeing if there are any other questions. Okay, so going back to Africa. So to whom do we have to contact to get a license in Africa? So it would depend on the market that you're looking at, but in all cases you would have to go to the regulator. Okay, so when I say it depends on the market, in some markets you won't need a license, in others you will. So the first port of call is always the regulator. The MNO will not give you a license. Okay. What success stories, benchmarks, and best-in-class examples besides Telenet are there for fixed cable TV operators that became MVNOs and have been successful 3 or 4 play offerings? Okay, I'm glad you said Telenet is successful, because I actually worked on that about 6 years ago, and I worked on the negotiation for the deal. So it's good news that it's been successful. In terms of other ones that have not, or in terms of others that have launched, there are a number of MVNOs that have, or cable codes that have actually launched, and there's also quite a few that have been not so successful. So in terms of, for example, EVNO in Spain, they failed to get traction, and they actually downscaled their proposition to a broadband play. Virgin Media, that I think we're all familiar with, obviously that didn't start out as a cable, but it's now a triple play, and that's very, very successful. Cable Deutschland launched in 2010. I think they claim to have over 100. I think they claim to have 100,000, but I'm not sure whether that's 100,000 subs. I'm not sure whether that's mobile subs or whether that's ISP and mobile. Then there is Mega Cable in Mexico. They launched in 2011. They've got about, I think, 40-odd thousand subs at the moment. South Korea, I think the HelloVision is a cable code there, and they've got some reasonable traction, and they launched in 2011. I think some of the LATAM cable codes are looking at MVNO now, where it's opening up in that market. So there's definitely examples. I think success has been very varied across them, and I know that a few have pulled out. So Cox, Comcast, both have pulled out of the MVNO space. And I think that's probably all of the questions that have come in. So thank you for your time this afternoon. If you do have any further questions or would like to to get in contact, then do feel free. The presentation will be available. I'm sure Computaris will pass that on to you. And finally, thank you to Computaris for letting us share the day today. So it's been great to join. Thank you. Cheers.